Ach je. Und wo kriegt man dieses Pult runter? Habe ich auch mal gewusst. Pult.
Ah ja. Ah ne, das ist das
Pult ist genau. Okay, das ist irgendwie okay.
Oh ja.
Also wissen Sie auch nicht?
Leider nicht.
Okay. Ach, super, vielen Dank. Stopp, danke, großartig. Nee, ist super. Nee, jetzt ist gut. Dann hört man mich nämlich auch, sonst hört man mich gar nicht. Da muss ich immer so nach oben reden. So, hello and good evening, or good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming in one of the 4 or 5 panel discussions. We are struggling with the door. Special technical problems. And hopefully it's going to be closed in a moment. So can you hear us? You are far away, but you... it's because the door is still open. We have to try to close it, but it's very sensible doors. If you pass, they open. If you are lucky, they close, but sometimes they don't. I don't know why. Open doors is a nice metaphor for civis, but at the moment it's not very practical. Open doors, open minds, open discussions. So maybe we try to start with a few starting remarks from me. I'm Dorothee Kimmich, and from University of Tübingen, the German department, and my field is cultural theory and kulturwissenschaftliche Literaturwissenschaft, as we say in German. So what we have today is a panel discussion of the so-called Hub 2, for those who might not be so familiar with our civis. Oh my God, thank you. Finally. But if they come in, it will start again, so they have to stay outside. The hub, the so-called hub, is kind of a field of research and teaching. We have 5 hubs, 5 discussions, 5 panel discussions this afternoon. Our hub is called Society, Culture and Heritage, and you can imagine how broad the field is and how difficult it is to struggle with this broad and diverse field of thematic aspects and disciplines and challenges. But to be honest, all the other hubs have the same problem. Health or culture and climate and environment are as large fields as ours are. To just a few words to the participants of this afternoon, I'm not going to present them in a long deliberation because everyone is presenting him or herself with the aspects of what connects him or her to our topic of today, cultural heritage. Ines de Castro is coming from the Linden Museum for Ethnology from Stuttgart, and she is also member and part of the Civis community. She is not a member of the University of Tübingen, but she is a very good colleague of many of our colleagues and works intensively with, for instance, anthropology and museum studies in the Faculty of Philosophy. Paolo Carafa comes from Sapienza University and from Rome. Vasiliki Chrysantopoulou is from National and Kapodistrian University of Athens. Matthias Heinz comes from University of Salzburg. Alexandra Litu, University of Bucharest. Helga Mitterbauer comes, I don't know, she comes from Brussels, but also from Austria, I should say. Matthias Heinz comes from Salzburg, but also from Germany, and I already told you that I'm from University of Tübingen. So what we are going, we have two, maybe we have two or three or many interests, but we have also the challenge and the duty and the aim and goal, and also the idea how to cope within Civis with cultural heritage. And this means that we in the hub we have to reflect on the possibility of teaching MA courses and PhD courses, and one of the fields will be the question of cultural heritage. So we have to break it down, we have to narrow it, but we have also to find the really challenging and urgent questions about cultural heritage, which will help our future students to, or what we can offer to our students in the Civis consortium. So if we talk about cultural heritage here in the region, you might not know, I don't know, this is something really banal. And you can, if you traveled by train to Tübingen, you saw all this kind of little, not real, very impressive orchid cultivation, I don't know, it's apple trees and cherry trees and nothing more. And, but it is cultural heritage. And people here living within or with or from these apple trees and cherry trees even mostly don't know that it's kind of a cultural heritage. And cultural heritage, it looks like nature, but it's also culture in a certain way, because people have cultivated the trees, they had lived from these trees, but it's also an ecological question. It's a question about humidity, birds, insects, climate, and if you want the kind of the facing of the landscape, what you can see here. And if you are asking elder people, they are very attached to this kind of tree orchids because they lived from it for years and years and made marmalade out of it and all kind of things to eat and to live from. We have also another cultural heritage, a question what people who are not from the region here, you will never understand that this is a real cultural fight. Because what you see on your left-hand side, this is a Bavarian kind of bread bretzel. And the difference to the Swabian bretzel on the right-hand side, you have to be very sensible to detect the difference, because one are more soft and the other one are more like crackers. This This divides people from the region where you are at the moment and people who are about 50 kilometers from here. And we had quite an important cultural struggle about Bavarian and Swabian pretzels. It's to mark a little bit the difference between the region you are in at the moment and the region people are coming from. I can show you the cultural heritage, which is really important. So we have very different cultural here, Roman, Greek. We have also Bulgarian, Austrian, Peruvian, cultural heritage, and also from Belgium. So this might be the difference between the regions we come from, and you can also already see that there is a difference in scale, probably. So to be a bit more serious about the question we are dealing with, this is not something we invented for the civis discussion for this afternoon, but it's a long discussion, which is a discussion that is older than 230 years and has found different platforms and different institutions, and one of the most important texts is the Article 27 of the Human Rights Declaration. Everyone has the right freely to participate in the cultural life of the community, to enjoy the arts, and to share in scientific advancement and its benefits. Everyone has the right to the protection of the moral and material interests resulting from any scientific, literary, or artistic production of which he or she is the author. And this is something what we can dream about, because we know that this is the future and not at all comparative. It's not at all what we live at the moment in the present. But cultural heritage sounds very optimistic and very positive in a certain way. But I think, and what we are going to discuss this afternoon and already started discussing in the morning, cultural heritage is much more difficult and challenging as we might think when we talk about pretzels and Obstbaumwiesen. Because what we have here is only, sorry, Helga, it's only two kinds of, it's two examples. On the right-hand side, you have Leopold II. This is a monument which had been painted with red colored, symbolizing the blood Leopold II spread in Belgian colonies. And on the left-hand side, you have the so-called Stolpersteine, little golden plates that remember all in Tübingen, but also in other German and Austrian and Swiss cities. Remember the people who in former times lived in the houses where these little plates are placed, and it's mostly Jewish families. Some of the communists, mostly Jewish families that had been deported to concentration camps or fled to other countries in Europe or the United States. So cultural heritage is linked to cultural, social, and individual memory, to cultural history, community building, cultural identity, whatever that could be. It's linked to really strong affects and emotions, like the feeling at home or the feeling not being at home. It is linked to material items, immaterial practices, and it is also, and I think this is very important, we are going to talk about this, to imaginaries, what we imagine to belong to, what we imagine to be part of. Cultural heritage is also linked to wars, destruction, discrimination, theft of items, and censorship. It comes to conflicts, ideologies, racism, and nationalism, and it is therefore a core issue for societal communication and understanding, research and teaching, for museum and also research and teaching, politics, and in any aspect, what we can say, I think, conviviality in every aspect. So now the panel discussion is open for the panelists, and I'm not sure if you were talking about who starts, Would you know you didn't, maybe our guest from Stuttgart, Ines, would you like to start? I think because you didn't participate in the discussions this morning, so we are very curious about your comments to this topic. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Super. Okay, yes, good afternoon. Thank you so much for giving me the floor here and to bring a museum's perspective into this topic. Ethnographic museums in Germany are at the center of a very controversial public and media debate concerning their colonial legacy and their social relevance and role. Like other ethnographic or world culture museums, the Linden Museum Stuttgart is actively engaged in this debate. With its collection of around 160,000 art, ritual, and everyday objects from Asia, the Americas, Africa, and Oceania, it has for many years been engaged in a reflexive process of transformation. The strong connection to the time of colonialism that we share with most ethnographic museums is a difficult challenge for us. The collection of the Linden Museum was assembled from 1882 on, mainly driven by our founder, Karl Graf von Linden, lawyer and servant to the King of Württemberg. He was a great networker that offered orders or medals of the king against collections or for collections. The inauguration of the museum, the new building, took place in 1911. Closely linked to this the challenge of the reappraisal of colonialism is also the debate about the presentation of cultures. With the funding colonial perspective, only artifacts from outside Europe were collected, contrasting them with European artifacts that were assembled in other museums, like the Landesmuseum Stuttgart. Thus, we are aware that in history, our museum helped to establish a hierarchical perspective towards the world cultures, collecting foreign or exotic heritage. That it also helped to define European heritage as our own identity, whatever it may be. In this context, an additional problem arises. We have to be sensible towards essentialistic representations of cultures based on only a few objects, defining identities with attributions that are related on a small extract of the material heritage on a region, what museums often do. There is no question that such a museum of non-European art and everyday culture, would never be founded today in this form, as it no longer corresponds to our diverse migration society. But how can a world culture museum overcome this challenge? How can the museum no longer underline the dichotomy between Europe and the world, in brackets? How can it replace attributions and stereotypes of the foreign with new perspectives and networks that overcome an outdated cultural construction? The aim is to find a responsible approach to the collections and to their history, to the cultural heritage that we have in the museum, to find new forms of presentation, collection practices, as well as dialogical and multi-perspective formats. These new perspectives can also emphasize a more individual and subjective approach for the narratives and stories told in the museum, avoiding homogenizing attributions and stereotypes. And I would like to present some projects and approaches that are part of this reorientation that we follow for many years. Even though provenance research has always been part of the curatorial work at the museum, since 2016 we have been working on a systematic reappraisal of the provenance context of the collection. So provenance means how the collection came into the museum, what is the history of the collections. This is always not so easy to do, because it is greatly depending on the countries and regions, and they stem from complex encounter processes. We focus in this item not only on the factual period of German colonialism, but in accordance with the guidelines of the German Museum Association on the period between the 15th century and today in global context as colonialism. We also cared about researching our institutional history during colonial times, and we presented the result of this research in this exhibition that you see here, called Difficult Heritage, Linden Museum, Württemberg and Colonialism, with the aim to bring this forgotten topic into the discourse of the Stuttgart society, because colonialism is really not a vivid part of German remembrance. The focus was not on the effects of colonialism in the German colonies, but on how colonialism influenced people and society in Württemberg and continues to have an impact until today. An ethically respectful museum practice must allow a negotiation of interpretation and present different stories and narratives beyond the museum's curator perspective, beyond the Eurocentric perspective. This is, for us, a very important task and endeavor. This can only succeed with the help of participatory formats and in collaboration with partnership with representatives from the societies of origin and the diverse local societies. In a series of exhibition and project, we have therefore experimenting with different participatory formats like co-curated exhibitions, like joint forms of collecting, what we called co-collecting, joint workshop. Here you have an example of the summer school that we did with the University of Tübingen, with public history, 10 students from the University of Namibia and 10 students from Tübingen worked on our collections together. But also with intervention by artists in exhibition and by residency programs or a joint object research for our new digital database. Some examples of multi-voice implementation in the realm of the museum is, for example, this exhibition from 2019, Where is Africa?, that combines subjective views and contribution of various representatives from the societies of origin, as well as from the Stuttgart diaspora, from an advisory board that we established and that worked every second Friday together for 3 years with us to make this exhibition. Another example is the last exhibition from Love and War in partnership with representatives of the Tamil community, for example. Or if we look into the future, the upcoming exhibition, Stuttgart, Afghanistan, that is being made from the concept to the design to the presentation with a very large group of local collaborators with or without Afghanistan background. Yeah, we don't want to do also othering only taking people with a specific background. But I should also mention in this context that our visitors have a hard time with this new form of presentation because they are just missing the stereotypes. After a long time of ethnic designations, the new texts do seem not to meet really the expectations of the visitors. For the young people, much more than for the elder ones. So it is perhaps also something that we have to improve with the years. Yeah. And another point is very important for me in the reappraisal of the colonial thought. It is the internal staff diversity. For us, it is very important. It's this important part of the multi-perspectivity is also the aim of creating an internal staff diversity that is really not an easy task in an academic structure that you perhaps know as university as well. Yeah. 2 years ago, we started with a new model of junior curators, yeah, giving researchers also from outside Europe the chance to enter an academic museum career with perhaps other backgrounds than the classical ones of a curator, and by changing the academic prerequisites, but paying the same wage. Yeah, this is also important, I think, with the same money. This is something like we started like a training program because, for example, if you look at other countries, the average of PhD people is, for example, much lower. So opening up the system in some way helped us very much, and we have already could hire a curator from India and one from Nigeria. And so we created really an internal diversity as well. We are also working at the moment on another endeavor with the University of Tübingen, with Professor Gabi Alex. We established a PhD grant program to research the collections in Tübingen and at the Linden Museum, hoping as well to get a lot of applications from abroad. You see, for us, there is an important aim for close collaboration from the museum with the university and to close the gap between ethnology, anthropology in university and museums. I think that museums could be very important also as a link to the Society for Universitarian Research. Thank you very much.
Hello, Paolo.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody.
It's your side. Yes.
Okay, I will shift to a more personal perspective. Thank you very much. I think it's okay. And I am an archaeologist. I teach classical archaeology in Sapienza, which basically means I'm an, let's say, expert in Roman and Greece civilization, ancient Roman and Greek civilization, of course. And as you can imagine, cultural heritage is a core asset in different programs in Sapienza teaching. But as a matter of fact, since, let's say, the last 10 years, we developed something that can be envisioned as a new approach in researching also and involving students in this research and therefore educating students with the aid of cultural heritage. And this new method, let's say, starting from an archaeological experience. We started from a small group of people working in a lab. We were not satisfied with the situation of the knowledge related to ancient Rome. It may seem funny to say, but the idea was that we know many, many fragments of Rome, but no one ever tried to tell the history of Rome, reading the changing of the material entities of Rome itself. This is the only way, according in our mind, to transform fragments in historical documents and therefore supporting their value as heritage. And this is what we did. But we lacked the proper instruments by that time because heritage can be also represented as a network of relation. Whatever we see was a part of a wider framework, and this framework was changing over time because everything around us can be represented as a constant flow of changes. So on the one hand, we need to assume a narrative form, either in researching cultural heritage or teaching whatever we want to teach related to the heritage. And more than this, the past entities tend to be erased as time goes by. So we need also to be ready to integrate or to suggest how to integrate these missing parts and to consider different documents not properly related to antiquity or to the archaeological behavior, but nonetheless very relevant to have information, documents, or just clues about the past realities. So to manage this situation, we created and patented in Sapienza this archaeological information system, which is an information system based on the idea that any document has to be, any surviving document has to be located somewhere and has to be related to a certain time. And we asked the system as an overall bulk of information to help us in suggesting the relation we cannot see anymore. And out of this bulk of information, a narrative flowed out, and we published this book. Rome at the moment is the only city in the world to have a history written reading Rome itself, the underground Rome and the surviving fragments of Rome. The narrative flows out from this kind of images. We suggested the layout, the changing layout of relevant parts of the city and of single monuments as well. As you can see, we can go very rapidly. We also included in such a narrative more pleasant images where you cannot tell any difference in between what we have and what we thought we may have, but nonetheless are very effective and comprehensible by anyone. This is a very famous monument, the Circus Maximus. Later on, as a second experiment, we try to stress test the system and procedures, and we extended our analysis to the whole region surrounding Rome, and the method was always the same. You see in your right hand up, this is the archaeological site, but that site, that monument, which has been, by the way, erased by the creation of an airport, in some sense contains the history revealed by the different changing shapes of such a monument. Like frames of a film can tell us the history of that site. And this can be downscaled or upscaled to any entity related to the heritage. This is a second example. This is a city, quite a famous city in the Latin region. This is all we have, an aerial view, and that is the map of the scientific papers that have been related to this site. This is the situation on field, but that one map we have seen contains the history of the whole site, which has been created like a Roman fort along a river and then gradually expanded into a larger and larger city during the imperial age. We did not publish in this case this research, but is offered on this website. And lastly, thanks to the extra fund we have according to the recovery plan, we try to move another step forward. If it works in Rome, it works everywhere. If it works around Rome, because it's a very complicated it's a highly difficult case study, and we tried to focus not just on the analysis of single documents, even though very wide and related to very famous contexts, but on the procedure necessary to transform our knowledge into meaningful information and use that information to manage, evaluate, and at the end go to a communication of the heritage This is the important part of the slide is the lowest one. You see the workflow. What we usually are involved in, even with very relevant scientific outcomes, is just the knowledge of these documents. We have to try to suggest a meaning for this bulk of information, which is an assessment, and use, at that point, the fragments can be turned into a proper cultural heritage in the sense that they can reveal their historical value in terms of processes related to single places or to wider areas. And from that point on, anyone interested in managing the landscape or in managing the society, think of education or dissemination or whatever, can have a reliable information base to do whatever they want, starting from the actualization to the management to the communication of the heritage. So in some sense, from an archaeological procedure, we shifted to try to envision a broader method, including any class of the cultural heritage, because the only rule we have before we start is relating any kind of document to a certain place or to a certain time. There's no place in our country, at least, where the whole available information has been turned into an available set of dossier to be used not just in deepening the knowledge of the art history or the archaeology or whatever, but as a tray supporting everything we need to take into proper account the heritage, as a vital part of the management of the nowadays life. These are just issues, you see, from integrating technologies to the capacity building. You can move towards a number of outcomes. This is the organization of this research, which, as you see in this slide, is related properly to a methodology of acquiring knowledge and then slowly suggesting outcomes. Other issues, but we can go quite fast. You see, we are not aiming at the development of new technologies. This is another relevant part. And this is the overall sample and the case study. You see, it's quite a wide fraction of Italy. We did the 3 red rings are the smallest example, which is Rome, Venice, and Florence. And this is quite even now, we do not know how much information we have to know the history of these 3 very relevant cities, and this means to manage the heritage in terms also of communicating and education. Since this moment on, we are trying to share this kind of approach. Since 2017, we had the privilege of being ranked the department #1 in the world for classical and antiquity studies. Therefore, I think we had the commitment of sharing this, of widening our possibility of interrelating with other people. In the slide, you see the test cases. We are suggesting a number of other partners to apply the method either in the Mediterranean area or very far from us. This has been a cooperation with the Doshisha University in Kyoto. And these procedures has not been properly turned still into an asset devoted to the education of our students. We have a lot of specific either classes or even programs for archaeologists, philologists, architects, but even for life and biosciences, which are interested in this kind of management. But we are slowly getting to a formal educating program in Sapienza. For example, we created this PhD dedicated to heritage science, which was quite a success. We had more than 300 applications last year. Sapienza created Sapienza schools abroad, but I think this is the right moment and possibly the right place as a civics consortium to think about the possibility of grouping together and verify the possibility of, I was very impressed this morning when we were in the council, Dorothy said a lot, I wrote many notes about what you said, and if we are able to transform the documents we have in cultural heritage context, each piece of land can be turned into a module in MA or PhD. You made the example of museums, but I think this is quite feasible also at this scale. And you asked also a crucial question this morning. What disciplines need now? Archaeology, surely, but also art historians and architects, at least, need a proper assessment of all available knowledge. So we can start for a very simple procedures, relate information to places and time. And this can be possibly a suggestion and a new tool, because we lack at the moment to identify educating programs and even wider outcomes based on a narrative and the evaluation of the cultural heritage. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Who wants to be next? Where is Vasiliki? You
I
want
was
to?
returning to my seat, but yeah. Would you like me to take? Yeah.
You want maybe open it up also for discussion. And
Okay, how long do I?
6 minutes.
6.
Yes, as we told.
Okay, well.
Because otherwise we will maybe not be able to have, because we have 1, 2, 3 left, and we would like also maybe to integrate people from the public.
Okay, well, thank you. Thanks a lot. Well, anyway, thank you. Good evening, and thank you for being with us. In fact, I thought we were just going to have a discussion, so I only have some notes, but this is okay. I will give you a different approach to heritage. What we had been asked to prepare is to talk about the controversial impact of cultural heritage as a concept and an effort. Global challenges in the face of cultural separation, evaluation and dichotomy, gatekeeping and identity politics, etc. So I'll say, well, my own approach is from the perspective of anthropology and folklore, which is what I've studied and what I teach. I have worked as a researcher in the Hellenic Folklore Research Center of the Academy of Athens, and now I teach in the Department of Philology at the University of Athens, but my expertise is in diaspora, ethnicity, migration, etc. But also in heritage. And my connection with it is, well, as an anthropologist, as a folklorist, I've done a lot of field work in different parts of Greece, but also in the Greek diaspora. and I will be talking about it a little bit. And I am also a member of the, since 2016, I have been working as a member, serving as a member of the Greek National Scientific Committee, advising the Hellenic Ministry of Culture on matters of intangible cultural heritage. In particular, which is evaluating proposals submitted by various Greek communities and groups to inscribe important elements of their intangible cultural heritage which are still alive and functioning in the National Inventory for the intangible cultural heritage of Greece. In this respect, as a concept, a heritage, for anthropologists and folklorists, among others, we conceptualize it as a kind of social, cultural process and practice, rather than as linked to a specific thing or essence. It concerns the ways in which individuals and groups actively position themselves in relation to places, buildings, and stories, thus becoming a way of knowing and viewing things. Individuals and groups reinterpret aspects of their past and present lives and environments and reevaluate them as resources, thus responding to the values and needs imposed by today's socioeconomic tendencies, such as consumerism and globalization. Heritage is concerned with us as we are now, rather than as we were in the past. It is a process of self-knowledge, self-evaluation, modification, and claim of a cultural background. I like one definition of heritage by Butler and Rowlands. They define it as the way in which a group slowly creates a collective identity by narrating stories about itself. These stories are transmitted by each generation to the next, thus uniting the present of individuals and groups with their past and providing them with a sense of dignity and self-respect and with the right to have a future. What can I say? Heritage can be in 4 minutes, 3 minutes. Heritage. Heritage can be transnational, as it is in the cases of diasporas. Heritage nowadays, there is this tendency by people, by communities, individuals, and groups to make it global, that is, concerning humanity as a whole, such as environmental projects undertaken by internal and transnational diasporas to preserve the environment of their homelands and sustain it for humanity as a whole. I have got lots of examples about it, but I will not go into this. Now, the definition of intangible cultural heritage. It is as a living reality that changes, evolves, transforms, adapts, and passes on to the next generations following social and cultural transformations. This comes from the Convention for the Safeguarding of Intangible Cultural Heritage of UNESCO, which was voted by many countries, which was sort of created in 2003 and has been ratified by many countries all over the world. Greece is one of these countries. We ratified it in 2006, and within a few years, this is really important and is linked also to what we do in Civis, in our hub too. okay, we've already had 58 elements, they are called, of intangible cultural heritage inscribed in the National Inventory of Greece. Now, these include, well, it's called intangible cultural heritage, and for some examples of it are the Mediterranean diet, the know-how of cultivating mastic on the island of Chios, sacred forests of the villages of Zagori and Konica. Why am I giving you these examples? Because all these, Byzantine chanting, shadow theater, the Feast of the Virgin Mary at the ancient ruins of Eleusis, ethnobotanical knowledge and practices in Crete, polyphonic singing in Epirus. What do they have in common? Most of them are, all of them, linked to material objects or practices, definitely, but all of them also show values, skills, knowledge associated with them, and this is the intangible part of them. Yes, another important thing which is also linked to what we do in our hub is the importance of communities. As ICH is defined by the Convention, it is closely linked to the notion of the community, of the groups or individuals who practice, perform, recreate and transmit the intangible cultural heritage from generation to generation. So it is the ownership of the people themselves. And this is linked to the topics that we thought we were going to discuss, that is, the challenges in the face of cultural separation, evaluation, dichotomy, gatekeeping. Why? Because people compete over aspects of intangible cultural heritage. I mean, what Dorothea showed us at the beginning with the pretzel, I mean, it's not, they compete. Why do they compete? There are various reasons. Yes, such as, okay, one important reason is what I told you, that the Convention has given voice and rights to groups as owners of their culture, and therefore we have this competition. Once these elements of intangible cultural heritage have made it to the national inventory, I mean, there are national inventories in all the countries that have signed the convention, this is used as a factor to promote them for profit of various kinds. For example, to attract tourism to the place, practicing them, to improve the sales of these products, etc. From being part of vernacular culture, these items become commercialized and address different publics, those of consumers at local, national, and global levels. And so, intangible cultural heritage helps economies, we'll be finishing, of remote villages in particular, by attracting tourists and allowing the survival and sustainability of these places. Competition. This year, we sort of celebrate the 20 years since the creation of the Convention for the Safeguarding of Intangible Cultural Heritage, and as far as I know, all over the world, at national level, local level, European level, and global level, there are all sorts of events, celebrations, exhibitions, conferences, etc., showing that there is all this reflection about one's heritage. And we have a lot of that in Greece too. Well, I had some stories to tell you, but I won't tell them to you. Yes, so that you can see how such elements, as they are called, of intangible cultural heritage become a matter of contestation, competition among groups, communities, countries. Yeah, sure. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for coming. My name is Helga Mitterbauer. I'm a professor of German and comparative literature at the Université Libre de Bruxelles. I work on cultural transfers, transcultural relations, on intermediality, and especially on relations between literature and other arts, and from the periods modernist times and contemporary literature. In the frame of CIVIS, I have the honor to represent, be one of the two scholars representing the ULB in the Hub 2. And I also was coordinating or co-coordinating two courses so far, one on refugees, migrants, and exiles in German and comparative literature, and the other one, a graduate network on Baroque and Neo-Baroque. Yeah, and as Dorothee Kimmich said already, I'm Austrian, and 3 weeks ago, I'm a born Austrian. 3 weeks ago, I presented a book series I'm editing at the book fair in Leipzig, and I have been asked, what is the specificity of Austrian literature? What's the difference between Austrian and German literature? And my answer was very fast and quickly, irony. So never trust me. I will be very serious, but always think there could be some irony. Okay, Vasiliki gave us a very good and deep insight into what is cultural heritage. And our task was to discuss cultural heritage and global challenge. I started with global challenges, so I reflected what are the challenges in this time. And I think you will agree with me, we live in a time of upheaval. We have political challenges, the war in Ukraine. We have economical challenges, the gas prices, the energy prices, the price for food, etc. We have environment problems going on, earth warming, climate change. We have many social problems like migration. We had a big health problem with the pandemic. And we should not forget, communication has completely changed. So we have to deal with that, with all what we do online. It has a huge impact on our daily life. It has a huge impact on the way we communicate with each other. Think of all the kids on their phones, on their iPads, etc. The time limits we set them. Okay, and it leads also to isolation, and we have still from COVID huge problems with loneliness and etc., etc. So my question is, what can arts, humanities, social studies do in this time? And we got the smaller room. On the other side, there is environmental studies. I think the environmental hub, and the room is much bigger, and I guess there are more people interested. But I think we should be really proud of ourselves, and we should have a good self-esteem. And I only bring one example to prove that. Think of what feminist and gender studies had an impact on medical studies, on the testing of medicine. It took them very long to accept or to think of that they cannot test all new medication on white male, middle-aged man. So and now it's very clear. So every new medication is tested on women as well, on other people than white people, etc. So I think we have to offer something in this field. We should offer that with a certain pride and self-esteem. So and that also what interests me especially is what impact do these global challenges we are facing now have to education. Because education is changing completely. And I think CIVIS is really a spearhead in that. And as I mentioned already, and I only have 2 minutes left, so as I mentioned already, I had the honor to coordinate 2 different courses. And what I always experienced was this joy of learning I saw in the students, also this joy of working together, having this international collaboration. And I think what is really important in all these BEEPs and in all the programs we are creating is this practical component, is this asking the students to do research of their own, presenting their research, also to reach out, to do excursions, to integrate that in our programs. And I think with that, I have passed my time limit. And I won't tell you more about Baroque and Neo-Baroque, would be certainly interesting, but maybe in the discussion. Thank you very much.
Wrap it up.
Hello, good afternoon from me too, and what I'll have to say is already kind of a wrap-up. I will give just a very broad and general statement from my view, not only as a Romance linguist, so I'm Matthias Heinz from Salzburg, I'm a Romance linguist who's interested in cultural, linguistic and cultural contact. I coordinate an observatory on the linguistic influence of Italian, the impact Italian has had on the world's languages with the Accademia della Crusca. But I'm speaking here also as a dean. I'm currently serving as a dean of the Faculty of Arts and Humanities, which encompasses, of course, other disciplines, archaeology, ancient history, performing arts, all sorts of disciplines. So I'm trying to speak from that vantage point too. In very broad definition, cultural heritage, we've heard a wealth of aspects mentioned here, can be described as the sum of what mankind has endowed to successive generations, be it material, tangible objects and documents, or immaterial, intangible cultural practices, artifacts, communities of practice, imagined communities, perceived individual and collective identities. This can range from patterns of social organization. That's what we usually start with when archaeologists start with that. Landscape has been mentioned, settlement traditions, religion, traditions of all kinds, food, language, writing systems, architecture, we've seen the pictures before. oral literature, textual documents in a broad sense, narratives or discourse traditions, a very nice term that was coined in Tübingen, by the way, in the at the Romance departments in the 1980s. Music, dance, performing arts, painting, sculpture and the like, historical relics in a very broad sense, as well as contemporary cultural production, which we still count as cultural heritage, although some of that is being done contemporarily. The connotations of heritage can, of course, vary greatly according to different communities, different historical experiences. In this respect, I remember what Helga Mittauer mentioned in an earlier, it was a video conference. You made an interesting observation on how terms like Kulturerbe, or if we think of Ahnenerbe, in a German context are somewhat contaminated due to their skewed use during the Third Reich. Something like, on the other hand, something like German universelles Kulturerbe der Menschheit, kulturelles Erbe, europäisches Weltkulturerbe, does not seem to be so problematic, though. Furthermore, there are related concepts of cultural goods or commodities. Italian prefers beni culturali, which stresses this positive aspect of commodities, goods that a society in a way has accumulated, beni culturali. Sometimes we also have the use of the term cultural legacy and the like. So at a first glance, heritage seems to be somewhat static in the sense that it usually belongs to a circumscribed, delimited group and is observed and collected rather in retrospect. So one would suppose it is part of the past and history cannot be changed a posteriori. However, once phenomena like has been mentioned, translatio studii come into play, ways of knowledge transfer and dynamic processes of cultural appropriation, both in history and in the present. The concept and the cultural heritage can also migrate and be transferred. Those processes I mentioned of cultural appropriation are at the very core of cultural evolution, but we know they're also the subject of debate. Cultural heritage can come into contact in a dynamic way with other traditions, other ways of heritage during shorter or longer periods of time, and thus eventually become part of the heritage of another community, while it is constantly being reinterpreted. Moreover, this is almost never a one-way avenue. Language contact, and here I come to what I am working on, language contact over time shows this very clearly, for languages will both contribute loan words, and loan words are the crystallized tokens of the transfer of new objects, technologies, practices, semantic concepts. One could say that those borrowing processes, which are at the heart of what happens when loan words are coined in another language, are the very epitome of cultural history. Languages can contribute loan words to other languages, and at the same time receive elements in different semantic areas in exchange. So even such heavyweight donor languages like English, French, or Italian are, on the other hand, although they have contributed a lot to the vocabulary of other languages, there are also notable examples of recipient languages. And in Italy, in France, and everywhere, everyone is constantly complaining about the overwhelming flood of English elements coming in of Anglicism. So, for example, while English is, as of today, extremely influential by way of loanwords across the world's languages, its vocabulary is also exceptionally permeable to loanwords. So this is not a one-way avenue. So finally, taking on a sociolinguist perspective, we can talk about heritage language. This morning that has been mentioned too. Heritage languages have for some time been discovered as worthy objects of study. And from a cultural vantage point, they provide an excellent example of long-term reservoirs of knowledge and tradition, which are transferred to settings and new communities that however you call it, third place or whatever. And so they show how a new fabric of multilingual and multicultural societies is produced, where heritages from in the plural, from different origins become intertwined to form this new fabric. So ideally, a shared cultural heritage functions as the fabric holding societies together in a way, and fostering social cohesion. But I like to, taking up what has been said also this morning, and probably Alexandra is going to mention this, I'd like to conclude on a slightly different note, however. If combined with the notion of collective memory, heritage can also take into account problematic aspects of the history of a group or an area, what has been called dark heritage or critical, troubled heritage, or maybe here we would prefer to talk about legacy, and there can be certain ideologies, their practical consequences, as opposed to what we have called bright heritage and the aspects we prefer to remember. Cultural heritage is so. Just summing up, what you could say, cultural heritage is there as a kind of a treasure house for mankind, and you can take elements from this, and it can be a factor of social cohesion, but it implies, since biblical times, since Cain slew Abel, the troubled aspects of individual and collective human life. Thank you.
Thank you for waiting, and you are
very brief.
you are already introduced.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity. It's hard to speak after everybody, especially after Professor Carafa, because I also come from classical antiquity. I have an interest more in Greek antiquity. What I and my colleagues are interested in seeing cultural heritage in its dynamism, how it is historically constructed, built, and also commented on by past societies. Because how past societies, past communities are writing about heritage is also a valuable way to address it and to analyze it. For example, if an author living in Roman times writes about Greek monuments, he's building heritage in a way, or in more ways than one. Then I would like to stress, I think, a key word for everything that has been said and for what civis might bring is interdisciplinarity, and the effort to see cultural heritage from multiple perspectives with various tools, including tools from sciences. Then, and a perspective Laura brought up and Christine are the emotions that are involved in building cultural heritage, and emotions, attitudes, and also emotions and attitudes as cultural heritage. We might think about it, about everything like this. Then civis, I think, might bring up or might think about challenges already brought up by other organisms like UNESCO, which has approaches seeing cultural heritage as embedded in practices. For example, astronomical cultural heritage, looking at movable objects, immovable objects, knowledge and ideas through the practice of astronomy. And this is something we are trying to do also at my university on a very small scale. We have some archaeological excavations. We are digging late Roman houses, and we are trying to do household archaeology. So asking ourselves what actually happens in that kind of built structures. Of course, Professor Carafa was from the capital of the empire. We are the provincial side of archaeology. And as a last word, the perspectives that our colleagues from the African universities can bring on the global south, and also on issues that are mainly European, like classical classical antiquity are especially valuable, and we have this advantage, and we should use it well. And that's all. Thank you.
So, thank you very much. It's we have now half an hour left, and I think this is a very 30 minutes for a discussion. I'm not going to wrap it up now. The only thing is what I realized that in every comment we had the opportunity to listen. Cultural heritage is something that deals with the past and at the same time with the present, but also with future. And in every of your comments, future played a much larger role than I expected. Ines has a legacy, has a heritage of all this stuff you have stuck in your museum, and not just all this beautiful artwork and things and objects.
And human beings, huh?
Oh.
I'm very critical about that to speak what is
Not only
they are living for, I would say
yeah.
For the communities, half of the storage is a living person.
Living persons. Mm-hmm. Oh, so I'm a specialist for living things, so I shouldn't have said this because I'm interested in living things in modern literature. Because if we might always the divide between modern and non-modern, we draw the line between living things and non-living things, and which is wrong because we have such a lot of living things, especially in Austrian literature. So. But the interesting thing is that the present, your present work, what you are going to do, is something which changes for the future, and also for the public, which the public that doesn't like at the moment sometimes, because it's not the stereotypes you present, but for a future generation, which hopefully will understand better your effort. And but in many different comments, so the three, it's not only about past but about present and future. And I have two other words in mind. It was we had the heritage as something what can end up in cohesion. Something heritage has to do a lot of it with community and emotions of affects of community, and it can end up in cohesion. And I don't like the word identity so much, but it seems that collective identity is very important. But what I thought was also very interesting is the notion of competition. That we have a kind of a competition which is also linked very much to emotion and affect and hierarchy. And I thought this is something which could be interesting to compare or to talk about. You are free to talk about any other topic, but I would. Paolo, may I ask you one question just to start? It's maybe for all of you, this kind of competition between different cultural settings and different cultural communities, and do you have it all along the history? Can you, or is this something what we invented because we are so competitive? And is this a colonial attitude, how we see the world? And are we the ones who have installed this terrible hierarchy between different cultures, or is it already Roman? Or because this kind of competition between it's very interesting, because this is I think a question for the future. We have to this mindset of competition between the two pretzels, ridiculous. I want to make a joke, but Heike is right, because this is kind of part of the cultural heritage notion.
Yeah, invention before the waffles.
But is it modern, or is it?
Well, in some sense, yes. In some sense, no. Because it's. I think that let's leave the modern time on one side at the moment, but in the ancient times, there was not the idea of heritage, of course. But it was very clear that objects can contain information. So they used different objects to tell different stories. And these objects were turned into symbols to stress something.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a really ancient attitude, but is sadly lasted until recent times. I have been very impressed many, many years ago, if you remember, the war between Serbia and the Kosovo region. Excuse me.
Could you use the microphone?
Yes, please. Is it? Yeah. And the Serbians were claiming that the grave of the ancestors was located within the Kosovo region, so it was impossible to lose that part of land. And this happened also in ancient times, but I would not say that there was a struggle which started stressing and meaning of culture. I would say this is something related to modern Europe. If I'm not wrong, we are going to have dinner in 1821 tonight. So that part of the European history saw people stressing their origins to stress the difference between the dominant part of the empire and their claiming to independence. But I would not say it's an ancient feature, because they lacked the idea of heritage, but they had a strong idea of identities, of course, which was expressed in languages, rights, especially in religious terms.
Yeah, I didn't have a chance to talk about Baroque and Neo-Baroque, but Baroque is an extremely good example for that, because Baroque is often seen, or the 17th century is often seen as the first time of globalization. And there you have the clear competition between the different kings who goes where first. And then we have the same with architecture, with collecting pieces of art. And it always has to do with who is stronger. And I think it's until today who has more power.
On the notion of competition, I think there's also kind of a less fierce competition by way of prestige. If you think of the Roman Empire, not all of it was just, it was power, but soft power. It was not all important. They didn't have a language policy, and still in some areas of the empire, the Latin language was not generally imposed. So they would have to learn it, as the French language was imposed in France, in areas where Basque or Occitan was in a very rough way. The Romans didn't do that, neither did the British. It was more a question of prestige and of attractiveness, that it has to be said. It's still behind, there's a power play, there's colonial relation, but it's nuanced.
Vasily?
Yes, well, definitely the concept of heritage, as we sort of use it today, and how, as it is used, is definitely connected with modernization, with standing, with reflecting upon our lives. I mean, what used to be part of our cultures, vernacular cultures, for example, okay, I'm talking about what, well, intangible cultural heritage, but in general, vernacular culture, that was part of people's lives. People did not reflect about it, they lived it. Once they distanced themselves and stood critically towards it, then we have this sort of all these thinking, the representations, what they think about their culture. And this, of course, needs to be combined with commercialization, globalization, tourism, the fact that people now are led to actually showing, proving that aspects of their local cultures or national cultures are very important, and they would like to attract the world to see them, and in this way benefit the communities. And so you get all these things. And of course, this leads to competition. And I mean, just very quickly, an example of this, which I have lived myself. I mean, it was my own experience. I've done research in Greek island communities of the Aegean, and one of them, Karpathos, the Glendi, that is the festive celebration that includes music, spontaneous singing of improvised rhyming couplets, that is oral tradition. I mean, these people can talk through singing. I mean, this is still very important there. So, together with a group of people and with the backing of the community, because the community, the municipality had to say, yes, this is an aspect of our culture, Karpathos. We introduced the Carpathian Glendi to the National Inventory for Intangible Cultural Heritage. Well, it was bitterly contested by a group of people coming from one village in the north of Karpathos, Olympos, which wanted to have it introduced by themselves, separately. I mean, that was an amazing struggle that, because I mean, their Glendi, their version was included in the Carpathian Glendi. It was part of it. It was just a variation. But that particular group thought that, no, we would like to have it introduced separately, thinking that in this way they would have access to possibly some money that would help the community, would help the researchers. So it becomes an element, I mean, part of politics, power politics, tied with economic.
Okay.
This is one example of the competition. But on the other hand, we have examples of, and in fact, this is connected with our civis work.
Maybe there are two other
yes,
people who
sure.
would like to have also. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. I understand that nationalism strengthens the idea of cultural heritage, but I don't know if we really can say that there was no cultural heritage idea in the past, in the beginning, because I think this.
Say that they have not the same idea we have.
Well, not the same idea we have, but well, I think cultural heritage is constantly, the idea is constantly changing. Yeah. 100 years ago, we thought differently than now, or 30 years ago. And so I think we have to be a little careful, yeah, with all this, like also the Weltkulturerbe and all these definitions, and really looking a little also over Europe.
Sure.
And seeing other concepts. And I really think that people were aware of what was a cultural heritage in clothing, in writing, in presentation of that. I think also in the ancient times, for example, ancient America, I have a lot of examples.
Oh yeah.
Part of tradition, of course. I mean, people are always.
Maybe Alexandra has a comment.
Yes, I was thinking, first of all, that competition is not necessarily a bad thing because it's a factor of growth and development and innovation. And secondly, that I wouldn't say many times because I didn't survey them all, of course, but heritage is formulated a number of times in opposition to other groups. So confrontation is stimulation in this way, because when we meet, we need to identify, and if we meet in a violent way, then we really need to identify in order to build the ideas behind our resistance and stubbornness in conflict. But of course, building nations in Europe in the 19th century gave a specific flavor to cultural heritage. But ultimately, heritage is what we make of it. So I think it's up to us to challenge, to redefine.
So thank you very much for clarification, and thank you that it's under complex to only speak about competition, but it's also differentiation linked to a feeling of identity and different forms of historical narratives of being a community or belonging to a certain community and making differences in respect to other communities. And the question when and how the competition gets becomes in a certain way hierarchical or destructive and so dangerous. It has to be formulated in a more complex way that I can do it, and it's not my field, but thank you very much for this clarification, your arguments and your very different aspects you were talking about in this aspect. So the question of the more we talk about cultural heritage, the more dynamic the concept becomes, the more the changing aspects of cultural heritage become visible, and the interconnect that different cultural heritage is part of a differentiation, but also part of communication. And this is, it seems quite a complex question. It's not, I'm here and you are there. I have nothing to do with you and I have a better, more beautiful cultural heritage, but it's kind of a communication by differentiation, which is quite a challenging question, I think, and the narratives that are not dangerous, but can provide a feeling for community and an effectiveness to a certain society and identity. This is, I think, a question to be answered in complex studies and teaching, maybe even our practices. So I would like, if anyone would like to ask questions, we have 10 minutes left if we want to close the session in time. So we would be very happy to have comments or questions. And you have experts here, so it's an occasion for discussion and questions. If you want to think about your questions a little bit longer, so you are still open to formulate questions to one of your colleagues during the discussion. I'm sure you had some questions. Yeah, hello. Okay, Christina. Christina, we.
I just want to put in 2 more notions I missed besides the very fantastic thoughts. And I think one word I'm missing is the question of origin. And if you look at origin, that's something, I'm a medievalist, where you have really competition all along the Middle Ages, invention of tradition, of origin, who has the better saint for the city, and stealing relics from one city, bringing them to Cologne to transfer prestige of origins. So I think if we just look at heritage, we might miss, as you said, other concepts that were important for constructing identity. And I think it's not just about communication, but constructing origin, constructing culture, constructing heritage, identity, competition. And so there's an amount of imagination and creative processes that are very interesting, I think, for all of us. And the second word is something my students told me when I did a class on cultural heritage with them, and they said, in German, Erbe is not the word, and they brought in the term of Erinnerung, so memory, which I don't like, but I just want to bring it in because it's a huge discourse, which we should not forget. So this idea of remembering something that is behind us, and how does it influence where we are now and what we are in the future.
Yeah, this is a very important German tradition because and it touches the question of this dark side of, the dark heritage.
Course.
Thank you very much, Christina. Anyone who would like to comment on the comment?
Yes, memory certainly has to do with either individual, collective memory has got to do with the past of groups or individuals, but it is important for the present, and it's really very important as part of identity. So it's not just dark. It is the memory that sustains groups and shows the continuity of a group. And it is particularly important in the case of communities or individuals that may be migrants or refugees, and it's something that links them to past generations and gives them a sense of who they are, even if they find themselves in another part of the world.
No, I didn't want to say that memory always is on the dark side of cultural heritage, but Erinnerung and the tradition of research on the German word Erinnerung is linked with the Holocaust history in the last 50 years here with Aleida Assmann and the question of Erinnerung. This is sorry for the comment. So anyone who would like to comment on the discussion or has another question? No. Yeah.
I'd like to add a thing and perhaps something for reflection. As you know, hard sciences are hard. And recently in archaeology, there are genetic mappings that are referring to progression of groups, special progression of groups or communities. And perhaps we should pay attention to it because there is a very easy slide from genetics to cultural identity. It is a kind of a danger of confusion, especially in public discourse, because among specialists we know we cannot equal both, but in public discourse there is a large appetite and less reflection about things.
Yes, and we have here in Tübingen we had the discussions too, because we have done in the group from this morning from Nicholas Conrad. They had recent discoveries of certain groups that didn't migrate to Italy, and the question is what happens. It's a very genetic question about why people didn't migrate, or why you can't find it in Italy, and why they. This was very kind of very political. Yes, thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Alexandra. This is very important because, the cultural Kulturerbe. Why don't we use the word? Because it was linked to a racist program and racism and kind of racist dialogues. Yeah.
Okay, thanks a lot for that comment, because something I've been wondering about in the discussion just now, you always talked about identity in the singular. And I work in the area of heritage languages and heritage linguistics, and we very often talk about different identities because people are shifting depending on how they use language, how they dress, how they, what community they are in. So I was wondering, and I guess that goes to the entire panel, is why did you talk about identity in the singular?
Who wants to answer? So many bilingual biographies here. So, who wants? Ines, you want to answer? Yeah.
I would agree. Yeah, everybody has different identities. Yes, that's it.
Matthias, take a micro.
Well, thank you all very much. A very interesting discussion. I just perhaps would like to make a contribution to Dorothee's question about how back in the past can we trace cultural competition, perhaps. And the oldest example I can think of goes back to archaic times, because it actually concerns what we would call today the intangible cultural heritage, in the sense that in antiquity we have this, we read about this tradition that 7 ancient Greek cities were competing about being the birthplace of Homer, the poet of the Iliad and the Odyssey. I mean, Homer might not have existed as a person, but it was the poems were so important for cultural identity of ancient Greece, and this is within the same culture. It's not like that it's something concerning other cultures. So within the same culture, there were 7 cities that were competing about who would have the honor of being the birthplace. So I think we can trace it pretty back, and of course, I would second also the medieval heritage. People might not have thought about it like in the terms of labels, but the essence was there. Thank you.
So, just to repeat a little bit, because maybe you couldn't hear it. So Dora reminded me that that my naive idea that the competition between different cultural heritages is a modern invention is too naive, and that we have that we have even in ancient times, in Greek antiquity, we have the competition between different polis and different. Yeah. A little naive. I hoped we are, because I think we are looking for models, and in different parts of the world where identities can live together without collapsing into each other, but also without this kind of dangerous competition. And this is what we are looking for, because I think that what we see is that you need cultural heritage. If, for instance, for migrating communities and groups, you need it. In a certain way, it has to be integrated in the possibility to have different identities and not losing your cultural heritage where you come from, and not losing in a certain way a community, but not competing in a dangerous and then also in a dangerous way. And what we are looking, because at the moment we don't have a solution for that, and we are the ones who should, by our research, historical, societal, and cultural research, we should detect and find valuable models of how people did it in another part of the world, in different parts of the world, or in different parts of history. And so my first idea was in the ancient world didn't have this. This is quite stupid, but I think we have, this is the challenge we have to meet, because especially in Europe with the 19th century and nationalism, with kind of racism, was Alexander was mentioning, and the entanglement of nationalism and racism. We had this kind of terrible identity, and we are in Germany. We are also in Tübingen, where this kind of cultural impact racist impact on cultural heritage was so strongly and so heavily promoted here in this university that this is something we have to reflect on, I think. So thank you also for the idea of different identities. Matthias, sorry.
Yes, just to follow up on that, and the shifting identities are of course a factor, I think, but there's on the one hand this kind of the sense of belonging. Every individual somehow wishes for, longs for, one wants to fit in or belong to a smaller community, whereas if the community is too close, it becomes incestuous, so you have to have this kind of cultural contact. But that is all, I think, something we reflect on, and rightly so, from an academic perspective. But just to introduce now the third mission, as the civic engagement, the civis aspect, because over there, in fact, they're debating, or it's all very solution-oriented, challenge-based. And I think we also have the challenge to think about ways to also value cultural heritage with all the reflected stance on dark sides, troubled aspects. It's also something to value, because I think that the big problem with all the upheaval and the challenges we're facing as societies, if mankind, or at least the societies that we are part of, if we don't really get it that we are kind of a community and with some shared objectives, some shared goals, it will be very difficult to go ahead finding technological solutions in the end for just individuals that are not cohesive, that are not willing to go along, will be difficult. And I think that is one thing that we can contribute, but we're and which we probably have to talk about more. We have to show that our disciplines can contribute.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you to remind us that this is also something we have to think about for the future. But Matthias, it was the idea why I showed you the slide with these apple tree things. Because I think this is exactly the moment where you can see that the ecological issues and the question of cultural heritage is not two things. Because we know since 70 years, we know about the climate change, but people don't react. They don't do what our colleagues tell them, and we don't do what those colleagues tell us. We drive cars, we take planes, we eat stupid foods, and we have clothing that we shouldn't wear, and all the kind of things what we do. And the thing is that the cultural heritage, maybe sometime you have in these small communities, people who are so in love with apple trees that you can move, you can bring them to be careful with these parts of very banal and simple things about. And the apple even are not very good, but they are from here, and it's kind of it's a very ecological thing where you didn't plant the very big and very very powerful trees, but it's old trees and it's not so sweet apples. So this is something what I think it's important to link the different issues we have, and exactly that they can't live without our knowledge about cultural heritage, narratives, and and affects and emotions, and how to bring people to really do what they know. And this is what they might do when they have a feeling of belonging, responsibility, community building, and something. This is the kind of hope we can have, that in this case people care. Well,
may I just add?
Luciano wouldn't say no, but because people even don't care for health, and they belong to their own body, but they don't care.
May I just add a subversive example to your apple trees? And I want to draw your attention on the ginkgo tree and Goethe, the most important German writer, who wrote poems on the ginkgo tree and emphasized how important the ginkgo tree is. And at every botanical garden, you have a ginkgo tree. because it was brought from Asia in, I think, 16th century. So it's absolutely not a German tree. It has nothing to do with the German nation, because it came earlier. And I think it's such an important example, and emphasizing what you said. It's also heritage is always, it has this part of invention. So it is a construction. It is made by humans.
Yeah, sure.
It's and all the points, and also trees are the same aspect as you mentioned. They are not even sweet, these apples.
Yeah, you have to love them. And don't read so much Goethe. This is very colonial. Yeah, we have to.
Sorry.
This is the last comment, and then we have people will afterwards have another appointment, and we promised to stop at 6, so we have 1 minute to say goodbye.
Okay, this thing of tying the local with the global is very important, and this is also part of the work that we do as scholars. Because we are mediators between communities. I'm talking now especially about sort of anthropologists, sociologists, etc., and the wider thing. And I'd like just to finish, because I remember what Helga said, or you said about the group working on environment. Well, okay. I'll finish with the words of a third-generation Greek-Australian businessman who was among the people who went back to his ancestral community and helped revitalize it. And he says, I think you prepare your future by using your memories and the lessons from your past. Your history shapes you. We are, after all, creatures of our environment, and the legacy we've been given is most definitely a large part of our environment, so we have to care about it, environment. A big piece of that is caring about the traditions and the cultural heritage that shaped you into who you are. So you see that how, I mean, he's not a scholar. He's just an everyday person, but he uses all these ideas, concepts, heritage, etc., linking it to memory, linking it to the environment. I mean, because it is a global concern, and people try to do this at the local level too. It's this concept of glocal that our colleague from Johannesburg talked about yesterday.
So thank you very much. So we were linked now to the other hubs, and we were linked to from past to present to the future, and we know more and better about the challenges and what we expect also that Civis can be a framework for such. We don't know yet the real format. It can be different formats of teaching and doing research in a European-wide community. Maybe we have at a certain moment, we have cultural heritage of Civis, Civis discourses. Thank you very much for listening and for participating, and I wish you a very nice evening. And also thank you very much for the panelists and for discussion and your contributions. Thank you.